Hello colorful quilters and welcome back to Color Girl on YouTube. We are continuing our series on curved piecing. In our last video I showed you how to sew these little 6-inch orange peel blocks using the classic curves ruler for cutting, which makes them really nice and quick and easy and accurate, and how to piece them together and trim and square them. So if you're just catching up, look back at the last video in the playlist for the classic curves ruler, and that will show you how to make these cute little blocks. I'm back today because I decided instead of setting my blocks straight in a 5x6 layout, I decided to put them on point, and I wanted to show you today how to cut the setting triangles and corner pieces and lay out the rows so that we can sew them together. I love how the on-point blocks give it a little slightly more dynamic look to the design, and the way that the colors are placed with alternating the bright solid colors and the black and white prints really gives it a dynamic look, and I think this is going to be a fun finished quilt. Okay, so today's going to be a quick video. All I have to show you are the measurements and cutting and how to lay out these setting triangles. So let's get started. Okay, like I said before, we are working from a 6-inch orange peel block, but you can use this technique to apply to any block that you want to set on point in a finished quilt. This is how you figure out how big to cut the squares that you'll then cut into triangles for your setting. So what we're working on here is we are going to make the triangles that create the edge of the quilt. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take my unfinished block and measure the diagonal. So from corner to corner on the angle, and this is 8.5 inches. So I'm going to take that measurement and add a 1/2 inch. So from 8.5, add a 1/2 inch, gives me 9 inches. So I'm going to take the fabric that I want to cut my corner, I'm going to take the fabric that I want to cut my setting triangles from and cut a 9-inch square. From this fabric, I'm going to cut it twice on the diagonal in order to get 4 setting triangles. Okay, so what that's going to look like, once I cut it twice, I'm going to have 4 of these little triangles, and that's what's going to give me the edges of my quilt. Now, you might ask, why do we cut a big square into 4 triangles instead of a smaller square just in half once and make half square triangles? The reason that it's a better idea to cut the 4 triangles from 1 square is that you end up with your setting triangles having bias edges that finish on the inside of your quilt. Okay, so if you can imagine that I'm sewing these to the blocks that form the edge of my quilt, this straight edge is the straight edge of my square. So that's going to be on the grain of the fabric and give me a nice stable border to my quilt. If I were to cut half square triangles, the bias edge would be the edge that finishes on the edge of my quilt, and when I go to baste it and even quilt it and bind it, there's a good chance it's going to get distorted and stretched out. So unless you absolutely have to because of the amount of fabric you have available, I recommend cutting the 9-inch squares into 4 setting triangles. This gives you a chance to sew those bias edges to your blocks, and they finish on the inside of your quilt. Okay, the next issue to address is the corners of the quilt. In this particular example, I set my blocks so that they end up with two blocks up at the corner. So I need a larger square for my corner. Now for these, I do want to cut them as half square triangle so that the bias edge of my squares again finishes on the inside of my quilt against my blocks, and the straight grain edges finish on the corners, the edges of my quilt, so it doesn't get distorted. Okay, in this particular example, I need two 9-inch squares, and I will cut them in half diagonally once. That'll give me 4 corner triangles, like this one up here. Okay, you're going to need 5 9-inch squares. 2 of them you'll just cut once on the diagonal to give you your 4 corner squares. 3 of them you're going to cut twice on the diagonal to get 4 setting triangles from each one. Okay, so you only need 10 of these setting triangles, but like I said, you'll need to, in order to get 10, you'll have to cut 3 and have 2 left over. Okay, so let's see how these are going to sew together. Okay, I've started to do a little bit of sewing, and I want to show you how this layout is going to start to come together. The thing that's different about sewing on point blocks is that you sew them together in diagonal rows, typically starting with one corner, and the rows get longer as you move toward the other corners and then get shorter again as you move toward the 4th corner. So it's slightly different, but not too difficult. So first of all, I want to show you how I did this corner unit. Once you've laid out your blocks and figured out how you like them and want them all to go together, the first thing you're going to do is sew this first row of blocks. In this case, mine is 2 blocks. So I sewed those 2 blocks together and pressed the seam open. I'm pressing my seams open on this quilt because you do have some extra bulk in here where the curved shapes come together, and there's a lot of fabric layers there. So pressing those open, and then I sew my setting triangles, 1 to each end of the row of blocks, and press those toward the setting triangles. Okay, once I've got this row unit done, I can add my corner triangle, and again press that out toward the setting, press that toward the corner triangle. Okay, so that gives me my entire corner unit of the quilt, so I'm off to a pretty good start. My next row is going to be these 4 blocks, all sewn together and pressed with a setting triangle on each end. My next step is going to be to sew this row to this corner, and you can see how it's starting to build out from that corner. Now my next 2 rows, I will need to sew the blocks together and add the corner triangle and sew these 2 rows together before I can add my next corner triangle. Okay, so it's going to be a fairly small quilt. You've got 1 corner up here, then 3 rows, and another corner down here. So it's going to be fairly small, but I think it's going to be pretty fabulous. So let me know what you think. I would love to hear your comments about sewing the curves, laying out the blocks on point if you think that's fun, and show me your finished projects. If you're making one of these cute orange peel blocks with me, make sure that you share on social. I'm Color Girl Quilt on Instagram and Facebook, and my website is also colorgirlquilts.com. I love to hear from you and get your feedback. Okay? Don't forget to subscribe to Color Girl Quilt here on YouTube. We do lots of great projects. We're going to keep doing some more curves because that's my favorite, but we've got lots of other fun things to do also. All right. Until next time, thanks for watching. See you later.